What happens when a band as legendary as Judas Priest lose their genre-defining lead singer? Let's find out. Now, Judas Priest rule. They embody everything great about heavy music. They're not metal, metal is them. Many say the classic slogan that Black Sabbath invented metal, but Judas Priest perfected it. And they say that for damn good reason. With the twin lead attack of Glenn Tipton and KK Downing assaulting your eardrums with riff after riff and solo after solo, whatever drummer they have at the moment always killing it, Ian Hill always holding down the bottom end of the band with impeccable timing, and of course the metal god himself, Rob Halford. He is the definition of a metal frontman, with a foreboding and gruff and frankly underrated lower register, and his screams that can hold back the gates of hell. For nearly 2 decades, Judas Priest ruled the airwaves as heavy metal's defining act, with amazing record after amazing record, hit song after hit song, and 2 years after releasing the thrash masterpiece Painkiller, the album that many people, including myself, consider to be the best of their entire career, Rob Halford, probably the most important member of the band, left.
He fucking left the band!
By the early 90s, Rob felt the need to stretch his wings and try some new things musically. As you can clearly tell by this interview where he's looking painfully in 1992, he didn't want to originally leave the band, but due to their label and contracts, he was almost forced out. 1 year later, he formed the groove metal band Fight, along with Priest drummer Scott Travis and Satchel from Steel Panther, which is kind of odd, but Fight were pretty damn legit. It was pretty contemporary to what was going on with metal at the time, drawing heavy influence from thrash bands of the era, and most noticeably Pantera, whom had opened for Priest on the Painkiller tour. To put it lightly, Fight did not sound like Rob's then former band. But that isn't a bad thing, because the 2 albums they released in the mid-90s are surprisingly good pieces of thrash-laden groove metal. And of course it didn't hurt that Satchel, or as he was known back then, Russ Parrish, can wail like nobody's business. But Fight wasn't to be, as they broke up and Rob formed an industrial metal band called 2 that was actually released on Trent Reznor's Nothing Records. It was an even bigger jump off the deep end than even Fight was. I mean, if you had told me that the same guy responsible for this was also responsible for this, I would not have believed you. And so if Halford was doing all of these projects, what were his former bandmates doing? And to answer that question, all I need to say is fuck all. The only notable thing that any of the Priest Camp did during that era was a random solo record Glenn Tipton decided to make, aping Yngwie Malmsteen. That was until 1996, when a tape of a Judas Priest cover band named British Steel, fronted by a young Priest fanatic named Tim Ripper Owens, landed in the lap of Scott Travis, whom at the time was shacking up with Glenn, KK, and Ian to reform the band with a new vocalist. Reluctantly, Scott gave them the tape, and at first they all thought it was dubbed because he sounded so much like Rob Halford. I mean, it's kind of uncanny when you go back and listen to these old recordings, so you can't really blame the band for thinking it's bullshit. They then flew him down to the studio to see if the voice on the tape was really him, and within the first 2 lines of the Sad Wings of Destiny classic Victim of Changes, the band had found their new singer.
And they said, get some sleep, and we'll take care of everything tomorrow. And I looked at him, I said, no way. Crazy. How am I going to get sleep tonight when I'm going to audition for Judas Priest? I said, let's do it now. So it happened that fast, and they asked me what I wanted to sing. I said, whatever's is hooked up there, and did Victim of Changes.
Whiskey woman, don't you know that you are driving me insane? Whiskey woman, don't you know that you are driving me insane?
So they quickly started touring, and there was a lot of goodwill surrounding the band at the time. Tim was great live, he hit every note, and he wasn't just a Rob Halford clone. He had his own style, at least in the lower registers, but when he screams, yeah, he was pretty much a Rob Halford clone. but there's not much wrong with that. If your biggest fault is sounding like Rob fucking Halford, then you've got to be doing something right. And the fans were stoked on him, and they were excited for the future of metal's premier band.
Tim being from Akron, and then Judas Priest is bad anyways. Rob did a good job, and hopefully we know Tim's going to do just as good a job, if not better. I believe better. That's my opinion.
Plus, Tim ain't gay.
Some less savory than others. So in 1997, they would release an album called Jugulator. Now that's a kick-ass title for a metal record, so let's look at the album cover. Oh. Okay, what the fuck is going on here? First off, the logo was changed, and for the worse. Why change the classic Judas Priest logo? It's iconic and timeless. This, however, is so dated from the 90s it removed its two bottom ribs in order to suck itself off. And look, I get it, they're changing with the times and they have a new vocalist. But Iron Maiden were doing the exact same thing at this time and they kept their logo intact. And they didn't even get a new singer from a tribute band. But you know what? I can live with the logo. But what is up with the lack of pixels? At first I thought I was looking at a bad quality version of the image, but no, that's the finished product. The new shitty logo and album title look crisp, but the artwork itself looks like a crusty JPEG. I can smell the Dorito dust. But here's the thing about the Jugulator cover art. You only see a portion of it on the finished album cover. The original artwork, as you can see here, is superb. It's sprawling and looks fantastic. It was designed by Mark Wilkinson, who has done artwork for many other Priest records and even covers for prog rockers Marillion, The Darkness, and even Maiden. But for some bizarre reason they decided to zoom in on the face. And it's a real shame because when you look at mock-ups using more of Wilkinson's artwork, it looks much better and up there with, dare I say it, Defenders of the Faith and Sad Wings to Destiny. And look, I get it. It's anal to whine this long about a stupid album cover. It has no real bearing on the music. But I think it's an omen for things to come. But before I get to that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Okay, thanks, bye. The first single released from Jugulator was Burn in Hell. And it's not bad at all, if not cheesy beyond belief, and different to what Priest was back in the 70s and 80s. Glenn said this was because there was basically two albums that went missing in between 90 and 97, meaning throughout that entire time the band was continuously writing, and this is the final result of that. Only thing is, we don't have those albums to see how Priest evolved from Painkiller to this. And we didn't learn any of this context until years later. So when Priest fans were all excited for new music after 7 years and hear this, you can't be surprised if they're a bit taken aback. First off, this was the first time Judas Priest had ever down-tuned their guitars, so everything sounds darker, meaner, and heavier. For the most part, everything is tuned only a half step down from standard, which doesn't necessarily mean much. Van Halen is in half step down, for instance, and it isn't the heaviest thing ever. But Van Halen, this is not. And some songs off the album were tuned down to C sharp and even C standard, which just reaffirms how Judas Priest were chasing trends with the down-tuned groove metal bands of the time. They went from leaders to followers in only a few short years. But the riffs are great and you can't help but bop your head to them. The drums are stomping, the solo rips, and Ripper is screaming like there's no tomorrow. But unfortunately, the song is not perfect. Mainly because of one pretty big flaw that surrounds the entirety of the Ripper era. And that's the lyrics. I'm telling you, you can make a drinking game out of these albums. Take a shot every time you hear a stupid line like that. Wait, actually no, don't, you'll die. You see, on previous albums, Rob always had control over the lyrics. This is obvious since he managed to put so many gay references in the band's songs. Island of Domination, Eat Me Alive, Jawbreaker, hello. And it's also pretty obvious because Priest's lyrics were never this bad. They were never Bob Dylan or anything, but they're also never Poison either. These are the kind of lyrics I would have written when I was 15 trying to be brutal as fuck, boy. Glenn, I love ya, and you can play guitar like nobody's business. But your lyric writing is on par with Simple Jack. But if you can forgive the ass-ramming lyrics, you have a decent song here. It's not bad at all. The second single was Bullet Train, and was even nominated for a Grammy, but it lost to a glorified B-side off Metallica's Load, so that isn't a good sign. It's got enough open string chugging to put Kerry King to shame, and it just sounds very pedestrian and uninspired. And I don't really like Ripper's delivery on the song either. He sounds like Trey Parker doing an impression of a stereotypical tough guy.
West Side Story, bro. What, bro? Sweeney Todd, bro. What, bro? What, bro? Merrily we roll along, bro.
If this was good enough to be nominated for a Grammy, shit, I think Metallica deserved the dub if this was their competition. Okay, so the singles have been a mixed bag. Burn in Hell was decent, but Bullet Train sucks. Maybe we can get some decent material out of the album tracks. Let's look at Decapitate, for instance. And what the fuck is that? It sounds like one of those snap wristbands you get as a kid. What's the purpose of it? It serves no point.
You've lost your head, sir. Well, you will tomorrow. Sleep well.
What does that mean?
Hey, Editing James here. Totally forgot to mention that this song has one of the worst lines off the album.
Brain Dead is interesting because it's about someone who has lost the ability to speak and is paralyzed after a tragic accident, and it's a great subject for a song. And even though the lyrics are a bit too blunt for my taste, it makes sense because you can feel the scorn of someone kept alive when they shouldn't be and they're trapped in the coffin of their own useless body. And Tim really sells the performance. And I also really like how by the end the guitars mimic a heart rate monitor flatlining. Death Row starts with this really stupid intro that I assume is meant to give the song some atmosphere, but all it does is waste time.
Death Row? What's that? No stay? Okay. I'll tell him.
It's called Death Row. I'm not exactly stumped as to what this song is about. A fifth of the song is just dedicated to terrible voice acting that gives poorly dubbed hentai a run for its money.
So what's the matter, son? Too young to die. Don't cry.
And the worst part is, it comes back throughout the song. It sounds like Dave Mustaine with a cold or Iggy Pop on Quaaludes. And it's a shame because this song isn't bad at all, if not a bit generic. The chorus is stupid catchy, and most of the lyrics aren't even that bad.
Say a prayer, best beware. It's not very nice to be electric chair.
Abductors is decent as well. It has a bit of a doom metal influence, which is different because Priest never even did anything like that, even with Rob. And it has a really interesting acoustic section that doesn't sound as out of place as it probably should be. But again, the lyrics.
They come at night and they infiltrate you. They paralyze and they mentally rape you.
I like how he rolled his R there. Okay, so we have some momentum. Let's look at the title track about an evil machine-like character. And to those paying attention, you know this is nothing new for Priest. They've been doing this shit since Starbreaker from Sin After Sin way back in '77. It starts with a pretty cool, creepy intro and it has a nice build-up, and we finally get to the first verse and... Okay, so the verses suck. How about the chorus? This song feels like a Judas Priest song on autopilot. It technically has all the pieces of the puzzle, but it feels hollow and lacks the soul. It sounds really rushed, like they were quick to show everyone how great Tim can scream, but what's the use of that if you don't do anything with it? And now I think we can all agree that there's at least one shining light on this album, and of the Ripper era in general. It's one song everyone can agree on, and even people who despise the style of the band have to give props to it. And that song is Cathedral Spires. It's a sprawling epic that I would put up there with Out in the Cold, Halls of Valhalla, Rising from Ruins, One Shot of Glory, Blood Red Skies, and even Beyond the Realms of Death. Actually, maybe not that last one, but it's still really good. It's nearly 10 minutes and classic Priest to its core. It takes so many twists and turns, the solos are magnificent, Ripper gives a performance that even Halford himself would be proud of, and that chorus. Wow. Overall, Jugulator definitely has some good material, but it doesn't do a whole lot to really justify its nearly 1 hour running length. For every one good thing this album does, it does at least 3 or 4 things wrong. Glenn Tipton's lyrics are heinous, the riffs can get samey at times, and the songwriting for much of the length just kind of falls flat. But the band's performances are as good as ever, especially Ripper, he gives it his all. So I can see why some people really love this album as much as they do. But I think the experiments of Judas Priest without Halford went long enough here, and it was obvious that this version of the band wasn't to last, so let's bring on the reunion. Oh god. Demolition is a hot fucking mess. After a response of Jugulator, which at best can be described as the band went back to the drawing board and tried to make everyone happy. They kept elements of Jugulator, took elements from classic Priest records, and tried to appeal to the nu metal crowd by experimenting with rap rock. Oh, don't worry, we'll get to that. This grab bag approach is kind of baffling because this album would be so much better if they didn't try and please everyone. Because by pandering like this, you please nobody. It doesn't help that around this time, Rob had a solid return to metal with his new band Halford, and Maiden had a pretty well received reunion with Bruce Dickinson, and a lot of the goodwill people had for Judas Priest without Rob had dwindled. So this album bombed. It sold far less than even Jugulator and didn't even chart within the top 100. The highest it got was a measly 165. Dude, I've had Skype calls that charted higher than that. I guess you could say this album was the demolition of Tim Ripperone's Judas Priest. So let's see how it goes wrong. Let's take a look at the opening track and only single from this album, Machine Man. And it's not that bad. The riff is chuggy and drives the track, and it's immediately noticeable how they have tuned down to even lower for most of this album. Most of it is in D standard, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's still telling of how they're chasing trends. Also, it's clear that the lyrics have not gotten any better. Glenn, why? You see, by Demolition, it was clear that Glenn Tipton was being a bit of a control freak. Not only does he write all the lyrics, but he has sole songwriting credits on a good portion of this record. And that's a bad sign because on most Priest albums, the writing credits were always Tipton, Downing, and Halford. Now in Jugulator, obviously they lost a key writer, but Downing had a co-writing credit on every track, so there was still a sense of democracy. But KK only has co-writing credits on 5 out of 13 tracks. Good lord, we're fucked. Now the next track is One on One, a song a lot of people point to as the best this album has to offer. And I don't see how that is because this song is nearly 7 minutes long and goes absolutely nowhere. It would be fine if it was like 3 or 4 minutes, but by the 70th refrain of One on One, Bring Me On, it gets grating. There's no crescendo to speak of. Also, what the fuck is that intro? Yeah, there's a lot more uses of electronic elements on this album, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's mostly resigned to in-between track fuckery, but sometimes it's buried in the mix of songs, which makes them sound too busy because they don't really congeal with the rest of the track. In Between also has these electronic elements, but it starts with this weird oriental sounding riff, which never comes back after the intro. It's like the band wanted to experiment, but they didn't know what to do with half of these ideas after meaningless intros. Subterfuge is We Live in a Society core. It's vague power to the people bullshit, and it fails to say anything worth noting. So anybody, no matter what their politics are, can listen to it and play the songs to themselves and think, wow, this says a lot about our society. It sounds like a song a teenager would write after realizing how corrupt most politicians are. but without realizing why there's so much corruption in the first place. It says nothing, it means nothing, yet the music sounds so triumphant as if they're CCR or something. Lost and Found is a really bad ballad that sounds heinously out of place, but even if it was in place, it's too corny for anybody to take seriously. Most of the album just sounds like lesser Jugulator tracks, and that's saying something because most of Jugulator does not sound very good. There's no memorable riffs, it's mostly just forgettable chugging, and because it down-tuned even further, Ripper is sticking to his lower register mainly, which is not his biggest strength. And even when he does scream, it sounds anemic to even Jugulator. But there is one bright spot on this album. Close to You, I would say, is the best Demolition has to offer. It reminds me of 70s Priest like Sad Wings of Destiny or Stained Class because it's soaked in pure melancholy, especially with how crushing the chorus is with the way the vocals and guitars work together. It just sounds like a tidal wave of grief washing over you. It's a song about heartbreak, but unlike a lot of songs of the time, it doesn't sound whiny at all. Okay, bring on Metal Messiah. Now people try and call Demolition a nu metal album, which I disagree with, because the only real nu metal elements are the groovy riffs which are already present on Jugulator, and no one calls that album nu metal. But this song, however, is jump the fuck up core if I've ever heard it. The rapping is on Fred Durst levels of bad. Only the thing is, Fred Durst's flow is better. The riffs are lazy as fuck, and there's this weird droning pinch harmonic that I'm pretty sure is a sample, and it's really annoying and won't go the fuck away. I played it for a friend of mine, and he asked me, and I quote, "What the fuck is this Sonic CD credits cadence?" And I think that's a pretty damn good way to put the rapping on this album. But believe it or not, the chorus is actually pretty good. It reminds me of Painkiller, but it's mushed in between all these terrible ideas, and it makes the chorus sound worse as a result. Also, isn't me or the lyrics Christian themed? When did Priest turn into fucking POD? Yeah, Demolition is not good. If you want a Ripper era Judas Priest album to listen to, then I recommend Jugulator. Even though it isn't amazing, it's a much better choice than this. There's so many different ideas jammed into this record, and none of them are fleshed out well enough to justify being there. If they had just stuck to one idea like they did on Jugulator, it would have turned out much better. There's also some bonus tracks on Demolition, one of which being What's My Name, and it's actually better than most of the shit on this record, so God only knows why they didn't put it on there. The name of the song comes from live shows where before playing the Priest classic The Ripper, Ripper himself would have some stage banter with the crowd and go back and forth.
What's my name? What's my name?
But a friend of mine said it sounds like a metal cover of a James Bond theme song you would hear on YouTube, and now I can't unhear it. Thanks, Caleb. And this is the only Judas Priest song that Ripper actually had a hand in writing, which is interesting why he doesn't have more writing credits, but that's probably due to Glenn Tipton being a bit of a control freak. There's also some heinous re-recordings of Rapid Fire and Green Man and Leashy, both of which lack the magic of the original songs, having been down-tuned to hell, and on Rapid Fire in particular, Ripper just sounds constipated.
Rapid fire between the eyes. Rapid fire terrifies.
Also, there was actually a movie that was based on the story of Tim Ripper Owens joining Priest. A bidding war started for the story after New York Times posted an article about Ripper, and at first George Clooney was involved, Brad Pitt signed on to star, and Judas Priest management were working close with the studio. But things slowly broke apart after Warner Brothers got a little carried away with the creative decisions, and Priest management said, "You cannot use the Judas Priest name without telling an accurate story." And that was it. Every mention of Tim and Priest was removed, but it's still based on them. What was originally supposed to be a legitimate biopic by the name of Metal God, which would have been way ahead of the game, was eventually watered down to a generic run-of-the-mill rom-com by the name of Rockstar with a metal backdrop. And this is a movie I used to love as a kid, but after growing up a bit, I don't love it anymore. and I've even aired my negative feelings on this album before on this channel.
These movies suck and you can't convince me otherwise.
You can tell the filmmakers had no real respect or understanding of metal culture. The story of a man living his dreams and friends in the band he worships is overshadowed by Mark Wahlberg and Jennifer Aniston piercing each other's nipples. And how's anyone supposed to take Marky Mark as a metal singer seriously? Whenever I see him, all I think of is this. Well, that as well, but mainly this.
Yo, it's about that time to bring forth the rhythm and the rhyme.
There's also a lot of uncomfortable and homophobic jokes at a character based on Rob Halford's expense.
No, that'd be you, Bobby. Why don't you just do your own thing? Get your own life. It's like being bloody Elvis. Except Elvis was the king. And I'm just the queen.
Man, fuck this movie. Ripper later said, and I quote, "They fabricated things and decided to pull away from my story and make their own because I guess mine was too normal. There's no telling what they put in there. If I could sue, I would." The movie bombs at the box office, and a few years after, Rob Halford rejoined Judas Priest and has since released a handful of great records and have toured consistently. Ripper has since sang with other legendary metal bands such as Iced Earth and Yngwie Malmsteen, and has even formed some supergroups. And since 2004, Judas Priest has performed none of the Ripper era songs live. Which is kind of a shame because even Bruce Dickinson sometimes sings Blaze Bayley era Iron Maiden songs. The Ripper albums have also been out of print for years and are not on Spotify. This has led Tim to complain about how he feels his era of the band is largely overlooked and has been almost erased. But Rob has said multiple times that he isn't against doing any of those songs, and since they're going on their 50th anniversary tour, well, at least they were before the world kind of ended, and the setlist for these shows featured many deep cuts, some of which were never even played live. So I don't think it would kill the band to play Cathedral Spires or Burn in Hell every once in a while.
Numerous times I've been asked, would I ever do a song from a Jugulator? Would I ever do a song from Demolition? Well, absolutely I would, because those two albums are just as valid as everything else in the Priest catalogue.
Right.
So who knows, that day may yet come.
To this day, Ripper's era in Priest remains as a bizarre footnote in metal history. Even after all these years, it's amazing how someone can go from singing in a tribute band to singing in the real deal. It's the stuff dreams are made of. And honestly, you can't even blame Tim for anything those albums did wrong since he didn't write anything. But when he performed live, he was amazing, and he more than earned his keep in my opinion. So tell me what you think in the comments. You can also click here for more metal videos, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell to remain notified and to support the channel. Anyways, take it easy, party people.